Hey, welcome to A Little Better. My name is Daniel, and I will kind of be your host today. We're talking about all things relationships and how to be a Christian and to bless other people, whether they're in your blood family or not, makes us a little weird to culture. Find out if you should set your kids up well after they graduate. How can you bless your elderly family members? All on today's episode of A Little Better. Remember, our goal in this podcast is to know Jesus better and by the power of his Spirit, do better. So together we can be a little better. Hey, welcome to A Little Better. We're excited to dive into this week 3 of Final Words. I actually preached this past weekend, but more important news came out that the brackets are now available to fill out. And so
public service, got some tips here. Hey, in honor of you, Drew, I picked Baylor to go all the way.
Really?
Right. Go Baylor.
Indeed.
You know,
Technically, that would be in honor of my son.
Oh, yeah.
Well, just
true.
saying. Everybody keeps asking me, like, hey, is that, you guys from Texas? I'm like, nope. No, my wife.
No affinity
my
for
wife
Waco,
just
Texas.
liked the
You were
name.
like Chip and Joe.
And I said, yes, ma'am.
what's
They're
Texas
Baylor
have to do with
alums.
that? Ian,
cool.
you know,
Hey,
producer Ian and I were talking. I was like, if we would have been on our game and known the name earlier, like the week he was born, we would have all had Baylor hats and like we've been wearing them. Go Baylor Bears! And so
It'd be pretty cool if Baylor won the whole tourney.
It would.
And then
It
I would
would.
be like, babe, you have the gift of prophecy.
Yeah. I really haven't looked at the weight. I mean, I know they're number 1 seed, but there's 4 number 1 seeds. I doubt they're the favorite, are they? I have no idea. I did pick them.
how can be there 4 number ones, Brad?
There's always
I'm
4
just
number
kidding.
1s. We need to add some graphics here
Yeah.
that explain brackets. Yes.
This is not bracketology, though. You know.
I would suggest most people listen to this, and so even if we had
Right.
images,
Yeah.
we'd have to like
It's a
explain
challenge.
them.
Yeah, it'd be even more difficult. So
Guys, it's good to be back.
it is.
Yeah.
First time back. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
How's
been
the-
three
how's the
or
sleep?
4 weeks. Yeah, it's
Getting there?
yeah, it's up and down.
Yeah.
It's hot and cold, mostly cold, but your body adjusts.
Yeah.
right?
Well worth it, though.
Yeah, I got a good nap last night. So
It's basically
full
kind
40 minutes, like Elf. So. All right, well, let's jump in. I'll start my own question. 60
No,
seconds.
I'll ask it. You
All
got
right, here we
60
go.
seconds.
Yes.
Okay.
I'll start my clock.
Somebody
Now.
start their watch. All right, so I wanted people to know the third statement of Jesus, reorganizing both John and Mary's relationship. And the action step is how that reprioritizing of Mary and John's relationship is how we should reprioritize our relationships, in the sense of our relationship with Jesus comes first and then everything flows from that. We should look to serve others above ourselves. I did that in 20 seconds.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
It's going to be a short podcast.
It is. There you go. We say that every time, but it's not.
All right, I'll ask that first question. I thought about this while you're preaching, and to me, it's interesting. Like Jesus is, and as we progress through this series, we'll see this more. But the third feels, in my mind, like the most random, in the sense of I feel like this one should have been first, right? Because Father, forgive them. Really, really powerful, really important. But in the scheme of all the things that Jesus says, this seems, I know this is going to sound bad, but the least important.
Yeah.
Take care of my mother, right? I know that sounds horrible because you should take care of your mother, but like when you're talking about the forgiving the world,
It doesn't
right?
feel cosmic.
Yes,
right?
it doesn't
Scale.
feel like
Yeah.
this has a couple people impact versus the world, all of humanity.
Right.
And it feels out of place, right? You have these really powerful first 2 sayings like, Father, forgive them. And you're going to be in paradise with me. Oh, hey, you take care of my mom. So,
I mean, there's only, out of the 7, there's 2 statements that feel like, okay. So, because the other 5, I mean, if you're at any of our physical locations, you see like the cool graphics in the lobby. You can see all 7 statements. We're not trying to hide anything. There they are. You can look them up in the Gospels. Like I think there's what's left. My God, why have you forsaken me?
Next week, yep.
And then
it
it is finished. Into your hands I commit my spirit. And then there's like I thirst.
Yeah.
You got I thirst, behold your son and behold your
There's the
mother.
two. Yeah.
Like those two statements are like,
Were they worth writing down? Right? It's
It's
like,
like,
well, we heard them, but these
okay.
aren't. There's something. Is
it's like, oh, he's
if
thirsty.
Drew was writing it down, he wouldn't have
thirsty.
included those, right?
Right, but if you think about it, this guy, you believe he's the savior of the world, and you're listening,
Right.
and I'm sure everything he said, you're like, gotta get that, gotta get that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
those are the two I was thinking about.
Yeah.
Really,
Yeah.
is behold your mother, take care of my mother, and man, I could use a drink. I'm thirsty. So,
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
Yeah, it just feels strange, but some of the thoughts that, and even like sitting down to write, and every commentary, you go to basically all the smart people. If Dave Baxter says smart people say, it's basically saying like, well, he's fulfilling Deuteronomy 5:16 of honoring his father and mother. That's what it means. And it's like, that's what the work was in that. It's like, okay, that's great, but I'm supposed to write a 30-minute talk about this. And so I think it's significant because of the implications that it has and the dynamics that it shakes up for John and for Mary, which we don't know the dynamics, how much it shook it up, but we can at least make educated assumptions with the dynamic in Jesus' earthly brothers, like just thinking about it for ourselves. I think I made statements Sunday around, if you have unbelieving family members, you get some of these dynamics.
Sure.
Like you get some of the dynamics that are at play. But I think also it teaches us about some of the things that I left off the table or I had to cut, in the process of kind of shelling it off, is how from beginning to end, God is always about family. No matter if you have earthly family or not. Like there were passages that I was going to go to, like in Psalms, I think it's like 68, 5 and 6, where it says, for he is the father to the orphan and the widow. He sets the lowly into family. And I mean, you think of Genesis 1 and 2, where how does God start his mission? He's like family, like Adam and Eve, go be fruitful, multiply, like fill the earth, subdue it, rule it, reign it as my heirs, and he does it in the context of family, in the sense of that. And I think from beginning to end, we see how important the family of God is, not just blood relationships, and not saying that to say that everyone should be married and have kids, but to say that the family of God, more thicker than blood relationship, is important to God and through the whole story. And we see that on the cross. It feels like we have to do a lot of other cross-referencing to get there, but I think that's clearly the implications that are happening between Jesus addressing, those people. And I think another really cool, just a sub-note that I lightly pointed out is just, I think I'll have to go back and fact check this, but I think this is the only time that we see positive characters engaging with Jesus on the cross. Everyone else is like super negative. Between, I think of these next upcoming statements, I don't think we'll see much outside of just Jesus saying words.
Right.
But
not till after death that Joseph steps in.
So some of these other things, but at least up to this point, in statements 1 and 2, and then in I thirst, you have negative players. The soldiers mocking him, the religious leaders mocking him, the crowd, as Nate Miller taught us, spewing venom at him, like all these very negative things that you're like, man, if it wasn't enough for Jesus to be physically tortured, he's being like emotionally and socially tortured as well.
Right. Horizontally, vertically,
in
all
every way
relationships
possible.
being severed. Yeah. I think also what I love about it is just the humanity it brings. I mean, we do think, hey, here's the Savior of the world. He's fully God. Does he really feel this pain? I mean, he's God. But I think you get that flavoring of his genuine, full-on humanity when, the pain, of seeing his, of caring for his mother and others, the pain of being abandoned by friends, the physical thirst. But the rest of it is, he truly is suffering up there. And a lot of that suffering is relational, both horizontally and vertically. It would be easy just to focus on the cosmic consequence statements.
For sure.
Well, I think in just humanity, right? When we get to our deathbed, I think one of the things we will think about is, what is that person's life going to look like without me? Right. And how can I do the best that I can to take care of them as I depart? Jesus is caring for his mother while taking the brunt of sin, right?
Yeah.
Again, we do that from he's doing something so much bigger than we can ever fathom, and yet he doesn't miss the small detail. I think that's what I love about Jesus is he's so intentional and he doesn't miss anything.
Right.
And like to me, this could have easily been a detail that was missed, right? Yeah. It could have easily been you know what, John he's my cousin. He'll probably take care of my mom. But no, in the middle of all that's going on in this moment, right? I think we often forget he is on the cross. He is paying for the sins of the world. Yeah. He is really fulfilling everything he came to do. And yet in the midst of all that circling around, laying on his shoulders, he's like, Mom, I'm going to take care of you. To me, that's just like mind-blowing, that
Absolutely.
Small detail.
Right. Yeah. And that encouragement for any of us who think that, God doesn't notice us.
Yeah.
God doesn't care for us. I mean, he's got bigger things, marginalized. You mentioned the widow and the orphan. There's always that passion for those who get overlooked or have been.
Yeah, it also reminds me about this thing, like, often we think not only we don't matter to God, but God's too busy for us, right? Think about, God has so much going on. Like, okay, God should be focused on the war in Ukraine right now, not my struggle with sin. But he has the ability to totally be focused on that and to deal with what you feel like is your meaningless struggle or your pain that no one else sees, but God does. And I think it gives us a glimpse of I don't even know the theological word for the detailed and the, I guess, all-knowing would be, like God is just so much bigger than we can even understand.
It reminds me, I was watching a sermon from one of my friends who is a seminary professor, and he was teaching in chapel, and he was preaching the psalm. There's a psalm that says, "For he never slumbers, he never sleeps," and he was just made some jeering jokes in the sense of, and he came up with a word, to never sleep. But he's like, we talk about God being all powerful, all knowing, all these things. He's like, I think we should be like, add this in, like he never sleeps. Like he not only cares for you in every way, but he never stops. For in the sense of that he never takes a nap. He's always on guard for you, for your soul, for your well-being. Like he's always up. Like he's never taking a nap. He's never resting on the job in all the things that he's doing, which I think is just another.
The world is not on autopilot.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
He is continually involved.
I also think that this might be Jesus's recognition and honor to his mom, who is still there. Think about Mary's story from the beginning. You talked about it, right? The calling that she has already walked through with, like, hey, I'm pregnant with God. Like that journey alone, the mocking, the sneering, the name calling.
Right.
And, through it all, now you're raising Jesus, this perfect kid who makes you feel completely imperfect as a mom. But the whole journey, where is Mary? Right there, right? At his dying moment, watching her son suffer.
Yeah.
She's there.
If you really want to get like an insight into Mary's story, I think a thing that does it really well is The Chosen. I don't know if you guys have seen like season 2 of The Chosen as they've been releasing it. They do such a good job of just showing Mary as not a primary, like obviously the main character is Jesus, but like as she's just always there. Like she's there's this one episode where it's like highlighting his humanity of like healing, and all the disciples are sitting around a campfire just arguing, like, why are we doing this? We need to go tell more people. Like, we can't be like hanging out here, like doing all this stuff. And then like Mary's just like helping Jesus back to a tent because he's just so physically exhausted from healing people all day. And she's like washing his feet and just like helping him like go to sleep. And like all the disciples are chilling, like, what are we doing? Like, and they're just arguing. And it just shows like Mary she's just there. And she's just like, okay, faithfully present in all those moments. And so
they creatively fill in a lot of gaps, but they do it really well.
Oh, they do.
They do it really well. Very, very good writing in that.
And you wonder, like, how did Mary translate this message? Right?
Yeah.
Was there a depth of meaning to Mary that we can't see?
Yeah.
Did Jesus and his mom talk about this before he got to the cross? And was this just like the affirmation, the confirming of like, Mom, it's okay.
Yeah.
This is the plan, right?
I wonder if she was just even that much better than the disciples. I mean, the disciples fled, right? They're clearly not getting it. They're afraid for their lives, and Mary's hanging in there. But there's so many things that Jesus says explicitly the disciples clearly misunderstand or get wrong. I wonder if Mary was just ahead of the curve on all of that.
Yeah.
But another random thought on that too is just like that woman lived a life of shame, right? Because 90% of the people around her just knew she was a sinner, right? That she had, committed, fornication. That she was that was what everyone believed. And then there on the cross, there's proof. There's God's judgment. Savior of the world, whatever. Yeah. And all of that shame just piled on, and very alone in that, right? And yet she's still holding on to the promise.
Yeah, that's good.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it is. It's really, it's just I think the ramifications of this moment of everything that's happening and all the side scenes of all that is just like so rich and could be mined for a long time. One thing I want to talk about, Drew, is you brought this up as talking about of caring for people like that, even in our family. And one thing that I brought up is a study of how individualistic mindset our culture is. That our first punch is let's have someone else do that, whether that may be caring for an elderly family member or whatever the case may be, which that may be the right choice for different families. But how do you think for us, what should be our focus? And we could all talk about this when looking to a scenario like this, of caring for a parent or caring for an elderly family member. How should we step in? What guidelines should we take to kind of put this in play in our own lives, looking to serve others above ourselves?
I think always being willing, right? Having a heart like John's. I think you made this point really well on Sunday of just like John reoriented his life because Jesus called him to this. And the hard part is sometimes, you don't know when you're going to be asked to do this, right? I didn't know, right? Yeah. So this message landed, I think, really strongly for Ashley and I because we are living a little bit of John's calling because I didn't expect my dad to die and I didn't expect my mom would be living with me. And there are tough days, right? Yeah. There are very tough days because it's just, I don't want to say it's unnatural, it's just not normal. But I have to remind myself and my wife reminds me and I remind her that this is what God has asked us, right? And it could be for a season and it could be for the rest of our lives. And you just have, for me, calling, reminding myself and everything, I know what God's called me to, and I want to live in that calling as long as he has me. And so just having a soft and willing heart to do something that's hard. I think that's one of the greatest things we can have as Christians is a soft heart because a soft heart is pliable. Jesus talks about we're the clay, he's the potter. And so I think the thing that he often, molds is our heart, and I always want to live in a posture where my heart is soft to the way God steers my life, even if I don't like it. On the opposite end, you see what a hard heart does, right? God hardens Pharaoh's heart. He tries to steer him, and it's no. And so I want to live in the world where God asks me, it's a yes, because my heart is soft. So I think one of the biggest things to have is just a soft heart.
Yeah, and I know that for me, there can be a lot of talking myself out of things or just overthinking something or whatever. Then the moment passes, right? There was an opportunity. Someone was in the ditch on the side of the road. And by the time you've done thinking about it, they died or someone else stepped in. Yeah. But just these moments come up and just having that sensitivity to the spirit. I'm talking to myself here just to have that, openness that, hey, here's your opportunity, go with it. Right now in our house, we have an empty second floor because we're empty nesters. Our 4 grown kids are gone, and Karen and I are on the 3rd floor of our house, and it's just like, what does God want to use that second floor for? Just being being open and ready. We did have someone stay there like during the pandemic, friends from our community group and
That's cool.
stuff. But yeah, just yeah, it's easy for me to like not be a little oblivious to it or talk myself out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of things. It's our culture that plays that because we are so individualistic. Other cultures, thinking about elderly family members or even the age that kids move out, it's much older. Where in our culture, it's just there's expectations that are set that are very different.
It seems like if you look at most of time and most of the world, it's the majority of time, majority of places have multi-generational homes, right?
Yeah.
And people aren't scattered as far, right? We live in an age where people are so scattered. I mean, God, thank God that it worked out for you, but your family, your brothers, I mean, people are scattered.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It makes these things harder.
Yeah.
It does. There was a very interesting, I always recommend a book, and we were talking about how much people, don't love to read, but there's a really interesting book that Jefferson Bethke put out, I think a year and a half ago. It's called Take Back Your Family, and he does a whole section on single family unit homes in America and like when they actually started, how they actually came about. And it was really fascinating chapter of just how he asked the question of why are parents seen as successful when their 18-year-old can move out and self-support? But if they have to live until they're 25, pay off student loans or whatever the case may be, they're like almost seen in their friend circles as like, well, you're
You still live at home?
Wow, you're lame as the kid.
We may have applied some pressure to our children.
And then the second thing is like the parents in their friend circles are almost seen as like inadequate because their kid was almost like failure to take flight. Like a baby bird who's just still hanging out in the nest. Like, why is that our mindset when? For most, as you said, and he points out, most of time it's like that was not seen as the. He talks
even
about
in America, like you look at the Amish culture,
that's
right?
He points out the Amish. Yeah.
So they, when they had a child or someone got married, they didn't add up. They basically had a single family home that you added an addition to.
That's exactly what
it was like you're moving. And even other cultures like Spanish culture and like Puerto Rican culture and Mexican culture, like a lot of the families, they live together. Yeah. Right.
So he talks about the different mindset, and he uses the Amish as an example, and he talks about they either build on or they'll do kind of a thing of like, okay, we own this 30 acres, we're going to give you half an acre on the backside, build you a house, pay for it for you and your spouse to move into, and it's like they set them up. But in our culture, when we're talking about taking care of family members and these different things, it's like. That's somewhat. No, you got to do it. If you're really going to thrive, you got to do it on your own. You got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and do your thing. And I just think it's really just interesting that it is the water that we're swimming in. Like living in America, it's almost those are like the social expectations for rising young adults and for parents who are in their late 40s, 50s, 60s of what you do to help your kid is you cut them off. It's like, well.
And that's something that missions can help with, right? We go not because we're blessing some other part of the world with the gospel, but we're also seeing when the gospel takes root in that culture, like how different it looks than ours, right? You can see like African cultures that say, we totally get the body of Christ. We totally get community. We are all connected. What are you Americans doing? So just to be able to see that.
That's an interesting dynamic, that single family home and just how it came about. And
I'll ruin it and I'll tell you how it came about. Thank you, Sears and Roebuck catalog.
Oh my!
He traced it back to Sears, and they basically had this home in a box is what they called it.
Sold the plans,
and you could order it, and they sold the plans. They basically shipped you a shipping container with every board pre-cut screw, and it was basically like. I can't even imagine doing this like crazy IKEA put a whole house together.
That sounds awesome.
And our house was built in 1925, and we found the plans for it. They're like store-bought plans. Yeah. And there's the movie Contact years ago with Jodie Foster. Was a Carl Sagan thing, but anyway, that house that she grows up in, it's our house. It's exactly the same plan. It has exactly the same.
And he shows you he does some. There's some architecture, people who do research in America that they tracked down how many of those Sears and Roebuck houses are still like
Yeah.
up today,
Yeah.
and like so all that research is in the book. But he basically says like this is when in America in the early like 1920s ish when they started selling floor plans for single family unit homes,
Yes.
and then it just like caught.
off. Yeah.
And then that's when people stopped thinking, oh, we should live on the same block as our family, or we should live in the same house as our family, or we could live.
Yo,
blank
I
in our
feel
family.
pretty excited now because Joel, I'm just going to give you a piece of our land and let's go. You
Let's do
you never have to leave a nest
Make
egg.
Ashley happy.
That's right.
Never have to say goodbye.
It's really interesting to say the least. Yeah, for real. Yeah, nice.
Wow. So what else did you leave on the table? Were there? That's always an interesting question for me because you do so much research, so much reading, and there's so many ways you can go.
Yeah, I've talked about briefly is I think one of the big things that I left on the table was, in Genesis 1 and 2, how it traces the thread of family is seen all the way throughout. That was a big piece of a lot of research in Genesis. Genesis 1 and 2, how the family was God's original plan, for pre-fall, and it remains throughout that. And then what does it mean to be a part of the family of God? I talked about that psalm of, he sets the lowly into families, because I think a people that we constantly are thinking about is those who are single still, and not saying that they are a lesser, less than, but they are a part of the family of God. And what does that look like to serve the body of Christ as a single person, and bless someone else, and using your time, talents, and energy in that same way. And I think bigger picture things is things that we've talked about is and things that Rena and I, my wife, are wrestling through is like, okay, what does it look like to be a blessing to our kids and actually like take some of these principles that we see in Scripture that may seem weird to the waters we're swimming in, to our culture, that maybe when they turn 18, and we're already thinking about like, okay, when Wells, turns 18, which will be in 16 more years, right? But like, okay, what does that look like? But what does that look like for him and for the rest of our kids to set them up to succeed in ways that our parents did, but ways that we'd be like, man, how can we still help them without just like, spoon feeding, I think that's some of the tension, and I think a lot of that was still there, and that's churning in my mind, but maybe is not super applicable to everybody's story. So it just kind of was easy to push off the plate, if you want to say it like that. And so
weird. That sounds like have we done that as a sermon series? Weird.
I mean, I don't think we've called a sermon series weird, but I think we've talked about weird things. Yeah, for sure. But
it's all that countercultural.
It is it really is. Well, sweet guys. Daniel, great job. Thanks for jumping in. Nate Miller, awesome job. 3 awesome weeks in the series. Next week, we're talking about my God, why have you forsaken me? I get to
say it in Aramaic.
Pronounce that.
It's a big one.
Lam shablaka. Someone told me, just say it confidently and everybody will believe you know what you're talking about.
That's right.
So.
look at that one person that,
Or they'll think you're speaking in tongues.
That's right. I did Google the translation yesterday. So, yeah.
the pronunciation, you mean?
What did I say? The translation?
Translation.
Oh, the translation is my mind. Yeah, it's there for me.
Yeah, it's already
the
there.
pronunciation. I've heard people say it so many different ways.
Yeah.
The first, 3 words are easy, and then you get to the big S word, and you're just like, shlah, 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 shlah,
Yeah. It reminds me of growing up, we used to, like, in Baptist church, every Easter, it was the Easter cantata. And there was always a song that was about the 7 sayings on the cross. And there was that one guy that, always had to say that statement. Because, you couldn't just say that statement in English. You always had to say it in the Aramaic. And so it's like, why couldn't we just say, my God, why? But no, we have to say,
know.
That's funny.
So, yeah.
Anyway, I was supposed to wrap this up. So thanks for joining us. Hey, ask your questions. We'd love to answer any questions that you have in this podcast. We love doing it. And so hopefully it's a helpful resource to you. And we'll see you back next week for week 4 of Final Words.